You know, at this point, when I take the polls on my Patreon to determine what the next classic Doctor Who story I'm going to cover, I should know better than to put a Dalek option on there because it always wins. So let's talk about Resurrection of the Daleks. This one is notable for a few reasons. This is the first Dalek story for the Fifth Doctor. Actually, I think it might even be his only flat-out Dalek story. It marks the return of Davros, last seen in Destiny of the Daleks, which was a Fourth Doctor story. And it's it's a weird one. The thing is, I've actually seen it before, but I couldn't remember almost anything that happened in it. It's one of those ones that I watched early into my trying to get into Classic, and I wasn't quite tuned into the wavelength, so I can chalk up part of it to that, but the thing is, even accounting for that, there are episodes that I saw while still trying to get my head wrapped around Classic Doctor Who that I remembered a heck of a lot more than this. The thing is, this is an action-heavy episode, or story, in a lot of ways, and it's quite violent. Apparently, it's actually got a bit of a nasty reputation and caused a little bit of a stir at the time. A lot of people die. A lot of people get gunned down. You watch it happen, not just by the Daleks even, some including even by contemporary Earth weaponry of the time. So it is a bit like, and in some cases I'm like, was it necessary to kill that person? And we've got like a gas being deployed that like kind of half melts people's faces, which is shown in, I mean, dated effects, but gorier than I would have pegged Doctor Who for doing. So there's all that. I skipped to the end a little bit. I didn't particularly care for this, but that shouldn't be all that surprising at this point. I'm desperately trying to find a Peter Davison story other than Caves of Androzani that I think is any good or that really works for me. Because there's some that I'm like, okay, I can see how this is decent, but like still don't really work for me. It really is just his first and last ones. I like Castrovalva because it's dealing with interesting ideas, and Caves of Androzani is just a really solidly well done piece. Other than those two, I struggle with Davison's era. I really do. And the companions don't help. One of them's Turlo, who I get... Like, I still haven't seen the story where he comes on board, so maybe I'm selling the guy short, but I don't get any connection between him and the Doctor at all. Like, to the point I'm just find myself wondering, why are you two in the same room? Like, why? I get nothing. No chemistry, no rapport. I get nothing off the two of them together. And that's even extended to the audio. I've heard an audio from Big Finish of the two of them together, and it's still terrible. And it's not even that Turlo's a bad character. They just don't gel. Tegan is a little bit better when she's actually with the Doctor, but she isn't for most of this. She gets sidelined and literally concussed and set aside for most of the dang story. And ultimately at the end deciding, I've had enough of this. I'm going to leave. Which I'll come back to, because that's actually oddly one of the highlights of this thing. This thing also... It does something that I've seen Doctor Who do before in another episode, which I've seen but haven't reviewed properly yet, which is, Revelation of the Daleks, which is Sixth Doctor. This does kind of the same thing, which is, this is a story with so many sort of factions, so many competing interests. The Doctor barely registers as a blip on the radar of the plot. Like, he's here. It's not even that he's given nothing to do, but nothing that he does really matters. Almost everything in regards to the plot moves forward and or gets resolved with almost no input or work from him. It's not quite as egregious as what I remember Revelations being on that front, but he feels very detached, and it's frustrating because the idea at the core of this story is an idea that I like and one that I've wanted Doctor Who to revisit, modern era Doctor Who, which is this idea of a divide between the Daleks. And I think part of the problem for me with that, or at least in the execution, when looking back at classic era Doctor Who, is they decided that that divide was going to be between Daleks who were still loyal to Davros versus ones who were loyal to the Supreme Dalek. And while in theory that's an interesting enough divide, in practice it didn't really become all that interesting. Because there isn't a heck of a lot of distinction between them. And I think ultimately, like, what appeals to me about the concept of a Dalek Civil War is less about watching Daleks fight themselves than about seeing the whole picture of what that would look like. The kind of destruction that would wrought. What kind of ripple effects, collateral damage, like big picture stuff. Whereas pretty much any time it came up in Classic, it's very narrowly focused, and this is actually also true of Revolution of the Daleks, the most recent holiday special, is that it just focuses on an immediate skirmish between two factions, which, while would be an aspect of that, that's small scale of what I want something bigger. Now, there are, again, some interesting ideas in here. I do like that. Even though there are some Daleks that like have a loyalty to Davros, I do like in general that the Supreme Dalek is coming and going, we need Davros' help, but I don't trust him, and we can and will exterminate him the instant he becomes an issue. And Davros is no fool either. He doesn't trust the Daleks, so he's got his own plan going on, even though he wants the Daleks to destroy everything and to be the superior race. I love that when he realizes the Daleks are having trouble, his solution is that, I will make them again from scratch. Not to just do something different, just like, I'll do the same horrible thing I did before, but I'll do it better, which fits his mentality very, very well. So I do like the distrust between the characters, but even aside from them, we have these military folks in this warehouse, and then we've got these mercenaries headed up by Lytton, because this is his first appearance. He recurred again in Attack of the Cybermen, which I did already review. Because if you didn't know for some reason, I am reviewing these in absolutely no order whatsoever. Which is why patrons get to vote on what I do next. Anyways, he's got a mercenary faction, so he's working for the Daleks that are loyal to the Supreme Dalek, but he's actually not really particularly loyal to anybody at the end of the day. So ultimately, here's the thing. I've got 4 factions fighting each other, 2 of Daleks, 2 of humans, with some sort of cross interests going on in there, but this is just a whole bunch of people I don't care about and or don't want to win fighting each other, and the Doctor is very minimally involved. I think that's part of the problem with this story in particular. For all of the different sides of this immediate conflict, the only one I like maybe vaguely have a slight caring about is the Earth military folks, because like they don't know what they're getting into, but I'm not connected to any of these. The Brigadier, isn't around. Nobody we could identify or latch on to. So it's a bunch of factions that I either don't like because I'm not supposed to because they're the villains, or I don't care about because I don't know enough about them to care. And it just makes all of the action scenes stakesless. I just don't care. About the only really interesting character introduced in this thing is this guy who is, I cannot remember his name now, but initially he seems to have abandoned, the whole thing. He's fleeing the whole thing going on with the Daleks. Well, it turns out in hindsight, he's actually a Dalek agent. Now, I say he's an interesting character. He also makes no damn sense. Like, nobody knew the Doctor was going to turn up. Why? What was this guy doing? What was his purpose before he became a lure for the Doctor? What was he doing prior to that? Because nothing about any part of the story indicates that anybody thought the Doctor was going to turn up and get involved. So, like, he makes no sense. But I do first of all, I'm partial to cowardly characters, especially when they can be nuanced and developed, which he is. And now they kind of come up with a slightly interesting thing, this idea of the Daleks creating duplicates of people, basically cloning a version of them that they can control. But in order for that clone, that duplicate, to be able to infiltrate, it needs to also have all the old memories. So their plan is to do this with the Doctor and his companions, to then send them to Gallifrey to assassinate the High Council, which also makes no sense that this is what they're spending. I think this is part of Davros's plan. I lost track of whose plan was what. Maybe it was the Daleks. I can't remember. But it doesn't make a lot of sense, because we're established in the first part of this that the immediate issue the Daleks could not overcome was the Mavellans. So why are they interested in capturing the Doctor to try and assassinate the High Council of Gallifrey? Aside from the fact that just assassinating the leaders doesn't eliminate the military machine that you're actually at war with, which is like one of the plot holes about almost any assassination plot in fiction that you're just not supposed to ask. Just because more often than not, unless you also have a plan to that whoever replaces the person you assassinate is on your side and like you're installing your own power base, an assassination, it's more symbolic than anything else. Like, it can throw a monkey wrench into the works, but things don't crumble. So I don't know why that was their plan. Again, it just seemed to be something to do with the Doctor. We'll capture him and sort of torture him, and he'll talk this duplicate coward guy into tapping into his memories and fighting against things. Now, it's hammy and cheesy. I can't stand the confusion in my mind. It ain't great, but it is at least interesting. And it makes sense, sort of looking at the timeline of what the Daleks have done, that they would ultimately abandon these, since they can kind of rebel in a way and ultimately go with something like the sort of Dalek shells, the Dalek puppets, that we ended up seeing later on in modern era Doctor Who. That tracks. Kind of makes sense. Davros. He's played well enough. He's fine. My frustration is this was the point that it became very firmly established that every Dalek story is now a Davros story. And that's been the case ever since Genesis of the Daleks in classic era Doctor Who. And that bums me the heck out. It's actually one of the things that annoys me about the end of Remembrance of the Daleks, which I love a lot, but like, there's no need for the surprise reveal of Davros at the end. It adds very, 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 very little. It just, but for some reason they couldn't do Daleks without also doing Davros. And I like Davros. He's an interesting character, but the Daleks can be interesting without him. So while it's not inherently a bad thing in this story in and of itself, it frustrates me that this becomes the third in a row of establishing the pattern of Daleks, also Davros, because it was Genesis, then Destiny, now this, and it sticks on through with Revelation and Remembrance. And it just annoys me. It just annoys me that we could never have the Daleks again in classic era without also having Davros. Even though it's not really a problem with this specific story, it's just a pattern that irritates me. I'm not sure what else there is to say. Well, I said I'd come back to Tegan leaving. It's funny. I feel like in many ways, the statement she makes at the end when she decides to leave feels like a summation of why I have a hard time latching on or finding anything to really engage with in this era of Doctor Who, in the Davison era. So first of all, I like the way I like in general the fact that the vast majority of companions who leave during the classic era left because they chose to. I really wish that we could have that be a thing again. Actually, well, like Ryan and Graham did choose to leave at the end of Revolution of the Daleks, which I appreciated, to be honest, because it's been a long freaking time. But I like that she's choosing to leave and that she says, all of this that's been going on I can't do it anymore. And like, especially after the immediate story, it makes a lot of sense because she spent pretty much the entire thing terrified of her life and nowhere near the doctor, who was the one person in theory who could protect her. So yeah, I could see why this would be the straw that broke the camel's back. But she has something that she says to him. She says, you know, my aunt said when I became an air stewardess, do it for as long as it's fun, and then if it stops being fun, stop. This isn't fun anymore. Which, first of all, says a lot about her character and gives a really, honestly, very valid reason for deciding to leave. But like I said, kind of feels like it's speaking to me and why I have a hard time with this era of Doctor Who. I have a hard time finding the fun in this era. It's so grim. It's so... Everything is kind of terrible. And I don't mean the quality. I don't mean the writing. But we keep ending up in stories where, aside from the Doctor, who are the good guys? In my mind, so much of Doctor Who, at least what I love about Doctor Who, is the Doctor coming in to help people who need and deserve help. Nobody in this story really deserves to be helped. Like, maybe the Earth military forces should just tactically retreat and call it a day. But there's nobody to save. It's just the Doctor and his companions and a bunch of people who are terrible. And at least that's the vibe I get off a lot of the Fifth Doctor's run. And also, like, even the Fifth Doctor himself doesn't feel all that good sometimes. You know, this story tries to play it up like a big thing that he's pointing a gun at Davros and threatening to kill him. You know, calling back to, you know, I had the chance to end you before, referring back to Genesis of the Daleks, and I didn't. I can amend that. And that's not an invalid thing for him to do, but, like, I've already seen this Doctor fire a gun. He shot Omega and killed him. This Doctor, I find unpleasant. And not in the way that Colin Baker's was, because Baker was just abrasive during his time in the role. Davison, there's just something about him that he just doesn't seem like a good guy to me. And I can think of so few instances where I saw him protecting or defending anybody. It almost always seemed to be about defeating someone else, and way less often about defending anyone. And that's not to say that the Doctor always has to be saving innocents, but I feel like that should feel like it makes up a majority of any given Doctor's run. The Doctor should be about, well, doctoring, healing, protecting. Because he's the Doctor. He's not the soldier. He's not there to fight. He'll fight if he has to, but I don't know. This has become a bit of a philosophical thing about my issues with Peter Davison's era. I'm liable to ramble about that in general because it's something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Why doesn't most of his stuff work for me? So little of it does. And it's a shame. Resurrection of the Daleks. You rewatched it lately? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon. I've mentioned it a few times already. There's the thing. Help me out. Any amount helps. There are perks like being able to vote in the polls and seeing some videos early, but you also don't have to. Take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break.